Good afternoon, everyone. Greetings of peace. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Haris Tareen, and I am the Vice President of Policy and Programming here at the Muslim Public Affairs Council. We will be starting shortly. We're just letting folks in, and we will start within the next 2 minutes. So please do prepare any questions that you might have in the moderated question session, but we look forward to starting shortly. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Haris Tareen, and I'm the Vice President for Policy and Programming here at the Muslim Public Affairs Council. I wanted to start off by thanking everyone for joining us this afternoon. This is an extremely timely and pertinent conversation that we at the Muslim Public Affairs Council feel like we needed to have. I want to start off by thanking our panelists for joining us, taking the time out of their busy schedules. And I also wanted to thank you for joining us, because I know that there is a lot of questions and a lot of fear within American Muslim communities and minority communities at this point in our nation's history. We are going through unprecedented times. We are reflecting on how our students who have had a history of participating in First Amendment and free speech activities on college campuses are feeling threatened. Their First Amendment rights are being threatened, their right to express themselves. And that does not just apply to international students on visas and those who hold green cards. But as I was just mentioning earlier, there is rampant fear amongst American Muslim communities and minority communities that even citizens are now stopping themselves from actually expressing their First Amendment rights, whether that be on social media, on college campuses, or in any type of direct action. And for us, this is extremely problematic and concerning. We as Americans, our First Amendment rights are the core of what it means to be an American. It is what makes us Americans, our ability to express ourselves. And even if that speech might not be popular, but that speech is critical to our nation's democracy, to our nation's civil society, and to our nation actually thriving as a democratic country. And right now, many in our nation feel that is under threat. That is why we wanted to host this conversation. That is why we wanted to make sure that we brought experts, individuals who were able to have a conversation with us, able to shed light on the issues that we're addressing, and able to bring a level of awareness to our communities, especially those who currently are under attack and under fear. And so I want to introduce our panel to you first, and then we will start with some opening remarks from our panel, and then we'll have a moderated discussion with your questions as well. And a couple of housekeeping items. As we start the moderated discussion, please make sure that you write your question into the chat, and then we will make sure we ask it from the panelists. And if you have a specific panelist that you would like the question directed to, please do let us know. In terms of introducing our panelists, first we have Jenna Leventoff, who is a senior policy counsel at the ACLU, where she develops and advocates for policies related to protecting free speech and promoting robust access to communications tools. Prior to joining the ACLU, Jenna served as a senior policy counsel at Public Knowledge, where she advocated for universal access to affordable, reliable broadband. Thank you for joining us, Jenna. Second, we have Steve Rhodes, and we welcome Steve Rhodes, a respected civil rights attorney, author, advocate, activist who serves as MPAC's special advisor on free speech and First Amendment. Steve has extensive experience in defending our fundamental freedoms and provides invaluable insights into the challenges we face today from his many years of legal experience. And thank you for joining us, Steve. Next, we have Maria Kari. Maria is a human rights attorney dedicated to upholding justice and advocating for marginalized communities. Her legal nonprofit, Project Taha, has brought forth multiple legal actions against multiple government agencies, including the State Department, the previous administration, and now the current administration. Maria is also co-counsel in suing the administration for First Amendment rights violations. Thank you for joining us, Maria. Next, we have Lauren Manas. And Lauren, since 2023, has been working as the political director of If Not Now, a movement of American Jews fighting to end U.S. support for Israel's system of apartheid and ensure equality, justice, and a thriving future for both Israelis and Palestinians. So that is our panelists. And our final panelist, who won't be able to join us live but has sent her video, is Congresswoman Delia Ramirez of the 3rd District of Illinois. The Congresswoman was unable last minute, unfortunately, to join us because of votes and her schedule, but we do have a video from her that will shed light on her perspective and what she is doing to protect free expression and the First Amendment on Capitol Hill and in Congress. And it's important that we have the Congresswoman's support and the Congresswoman's remarks, because it shows us that we are not alone in this fight. There are many people on Capitol Hill. There are many people in coalition, and there are many people around the country who feel that our First Amendment is under threat right now. And we will, in the next few months, MPAC will be hosting a series of these conversations on multiple topics, and we will be bringing allies together on those topics and multiple members of Congress who will be supporting us as we move forward. So we'll go ahead and start with the video from Congresswoman Delia Ramirez from the 3rd District of Illinois.
Hi everyone, Congresswoman Delia Catalina Ramirez, Illinois 3. I want to talk to you about what's happening to Mahmoud Khalil right now. What you are saying is a criminalization of dissent, and that is point blank the authoritarian playbook that you see Donald Trump using. Silencing and criminalizing anyone that dares to speak truth to power in this precise moment. And it should be alarming every one of us, because a dangerous precedent being set right now is actually going to go after everything you and I care for and the care for democracy and protecting it. So I was among the first to speak up. I was among the first to sign a letter for his freedom. And we continue to demand justice for him. And justice means release. But what Homeland Security did is unacceptable, and it also requires accountability. And so we'll continue to fight for him, continue to demand justice for him, and continue you to speak up, because justice for him is justice for all of us.
We wanted to thank the Congresswoman for those really strong words of support for Mahmoud and for all the other individuals who have unfortunately been detained by DHS and ICE. And so those were extremely strong words for us to hear, and I think it gives us a level of comfort that we know there are allies on Capitol Hill in Congress who will stand with us and who will support us in these critical times. I was just on Capitol Hill this week with Senator Raphael Warnock and Senator Chris Coons, and this issue came up, and we talked about how faith communities can come together to make sure that we are protecting our democracy, rule of law, First Amendment, the things that makes us Americans, the things that define our identity as Americans. So we wanted to again thank the Congresswoman for those very strong remarks. We'll go ahead now and get started with our panel. Jenna, I'll go ahead and start with you. And we'd love to, you and the ACLU have done amazing work on protecting our First Amendment rights. The ACLU is an institution for decades which has led the fight for First Amendment, even for times when that speech might have not been popular in our nation's history. But the ACLU has continued to lead those rights. I'd love to hear from you how you see this moment for us right now. What are some of the challenges that you see us as Americans facing in terms of our First Amendment rights, and specifically some of the challenges that university and college students might be facing? Please, Jenna.
Yeah, thank you so much. So as you said, I'm Jenna Leventop. I'm a senior policy counsel at the ACLU, and I cover our free speech. And the ACLU is a free speech organization. We've been working for over 100 years to protect freedom of speech, freedom of the press. The First Amendment is under attack right now. And that is particularly true at our nation's colleges and universities. So, we think that universities need to be places where ideas are debated and not where students and faculty are punished for their political beliefs and punished for their speech. The First Amendment is very clear. We all have the right to speak out. We have the right to protest. We have the right to peaceably assemble. It doesn't matter if our lawmakers don't like what we're saying or if what we're saying is unpopular. The First Amendment gives us all the right to speak. And, as you said earlier in your remarks, a lot of people on campus right now are afraid to exercise that right. Last year, we saw teachers, faculty, students at post-secondary institutions across the country speak out and protest in support of Palestine. But the Trump administration, since taking office less than 90 days ago, since taking office in the world's longest couple of months, has been targeting people that participated in those protests or spoke out in support of Palestine on college campus. So it began with 2 executive orders. One states that it's United States policy to, quote unquote, protect its citizens from any non-citizens who espouse hateful ideology and ensure that non-citizens don't advocate for, aid, or support designated foreign terrorists and other threats to our national security. And then there was a second EO from Trump pretty early on in his presidency that requests the Attorney General to conduct an inventory and analysis of court cases that involved higher education institutions, alleging any civil rights violations related to October 7th. And anti-Semitism. And then it says that the government more or less needs to ensure that any universities report activities by non-citizen students and staff. And what was really concerning about this EO was that in an accompanying fact sheet, the White House was pretty clear that they want to target leftist anti-American colleges and universities. That is actually what the fact sheet says. And they had a promise to quickly cancel student visas of Hamas sympathizers on college campuses. And we have seen this EO playing out, unfortunately, across the country. So as you all know, a couple of weeks ago, ICE arrested and detained Mahmoud Khalil. He was a former Columbia student who led pro-Palestinian protests at the university, and he is a green card holder. Then this week, as I think someone alluded to, another student was just detained at Tufts University. And this student is a student visa holder, and the government has yet to allege that she did anything more than write an op-ed in support of Palestine. Write an op-ed. There is no argument that she was dangerous, violent, stopped learning at campus by blocking a door. She is accused of writing. Writing is one of our core protected speech freedoms. And unfortunately, there have been other students that have been detained as well, or who are afraid of being detained. This isn't isolated. So I think we want to be clear. And on the school side, schools do have to protect students from discrimination, from harassment, from threats, from violence. But political speech is not that. There is a difference between what Mahmoud Khalil did, what the student at Tufts did, and harassment. They protested peacefully. They spoke out. It is protected speech. And the administration also looked to take away funding from Columbia for supposedly not doing enough to stop their students from exercising their free speech rights. And while all this is happening, Congress is piling on as well. So the administration is coming after students, and then Congress is looking to enshrine a definition of anti-Semitism into law that basically confounds protected political speech with anti-Semitism in such a way that, schools would be incentivized to crack down on protected political speech, or risk their funding. So the ACLU, we are trying to do absolutely everything that we can to protect all of our free speech rights. We are on some legal teams. We're on Khalil's legal team. And, so far that's going well. And, we hope that it goes even better. And that he is there for the birth of his child. We wrote a letter to colleges and universities. We urged them to reject federal pressure to surveil and punish students based on their speech. We have an action urging Khalil's release. Over 130,000 people have signed that so far. We're constantly working on ways of policy, comms, legal, just to make sure that our rights are protected. But that's sort of the high-level overview. Basically, this administration is attacking free speech on campus, and we want to do everything we can to stop it.
Thank you so much for that, Jenna. And it's quite ironic. This administration ran on a free speech platform and agenda in many ways, and to see that the first thing that is attacked of Americans, and it's not just pro-Palestinian voices. It is, like you said, environmentalists. It is immigrant rights groups and so many other groups. And I think this, as I was just telling someone this morning, I was in an interview, this should scare all Americans. Right now, it's scaring American Muslims, unfortunately, and immigrant communities. But this should scare every single American because it just doesn't stop at one individual and one group. Thank you for that. Steve, we want to move to you, and we want to ask you, you have a historical perspective and context of some of the free speech issues and First Amendment issues. You have been a long practicing attorney, and we would love to hear from you in terms of putting into context this moment, where we are, how does it fit into the historical context of First Amendment violations, and some of your reflections on this point.
Thank you so much, Harris. Thank you to MPAC. And thank you to MPAC for recently appointing me special advisor on free speech and the First Amendment. I'm very grateful for that. I have stood with the Muslim community, my group in Los Angeles, Interfaith Communities United for Justice and Peace, stood shoulder to shoulder to protect the mosque in Los Angeles immediately after 9/11. And 9/11 and today are simply the most recent examples of government abuse. The ink was barely dry on the Bill of Rights when, under John Adams, the Alien and Sedition Acts of 1798 were passed and were enforced. I've given this talk many times, but now I must add that the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 is being used by the Trump administration this very day, in particular in deporting Venezuelan immigrants. So we should be appalled by what is happening, but we should not be surprised. America has a weakness for giving in at times of crisis, real and imagined. We had that in the founding of our country. We then came through various Red Scares. We had the terrible period in World War I when another Espionage and Sedition Act was passed, the Espionage Act of 1917, which is still on the books and being used. When we come down to the second Red Scare during the McCarthy era, and of course the war on terrorism under George Bush and the Muslim ban, and we come down to the present day. When you examine these periods, it is a period of hyper-patriotism, where patriotism and fear are combined to inflame the American people and to cause elected officials to lose their way as far as the guardrails of the First Amendment are concerned. In each case, it's been a period when they go after, in that early period, there was fear of war with France. So pro-French allies were censored. We had the pro-communist period that I've spoken of. We've had the people accused of being pro-terrorist during the Bush administration, and now people being accused of being pro-Hamas. In each one of them, a different interest is raised up. Patriotism, safety, national security. And sadly today, as former chair of Bend the Arc, a Jewish partnership for justice, today anti-Semitism is being cited as the reason to be punishing, silencing, deporting, and isolating those who speak out against Israel. The conflation of anti-Semitism with criticism of Israel is a cynical use of public policy today. We have to oppose the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, currently pending in the Senate, already passed the House, and if adopted as American law, and Trump has already adopted it as a presidential policy, it would emblazon in American law the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, which specifically includes examples of criticizing Israel as a form of anti-Semitism. This is a very dangerous proposition. On our college campuses, we have a combined impact of both free speech and academic freedom. Our campuses, as Jenna alluded to, are meant to be the most robust centers of free speech, debate, and protest through the twin principles of free speech and academic freedom. And I'll close with a simple quotation from the extraordinary Supreme Court Justice William J. Brennan, who in 1967, in the Keynesian case, said, "Our nation is deeply committed to safeguarding academic freedom, which is of transcendent value to all of us, and not merely to the teachers concerned. That freedom is therefore a special concern of the First Amendment, which does not tolerate laws that cast a pall of orthodoxy over the classroom." We've got to renew that principle. We have friends in this fight, like the Congresswoman just now and others, including 18 constitutional scholars who issued a statement across the political spectrum against Columbia. But we have weaklings today. We have weaklings at the university level. We have weaklings at law firms that have capitulated to Donald Trump. We need to lift up the allies and condemn the weaklings. If we do that together, and we'll expand on this through this important panel, I do believe we will come through this period, but it will only come through by solidarity with those vulnerable communities that are being targeted, especially during this season of Ramadan, where people should feel safe in the expression of their religious and political beliefs. And I think that's what all of us are committed to.
Thank you so much, Steve, for those powerful words and a reminder of that we're not in this alone, that we follow a legacy of First Amendment advocates and civil rights advocates through our history, and that we are just the modern day iteration of that. And so thank you for that. I've been speaking a lot to American Muslim countries around the country this Ramadan, and I always start with this quote of the Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who fought apartheid in South Africa. He says, I am not an optimist, but I am a prisoner of hope. And I think we are all and we all have to be prisoners of hope. We can't be prisoners of the fear that is out there, but we can be prisoners of hope together. So thank you so much for those words. Maria, we'll move to you next. And I know you have been taking on cases that have been unpopular over the past few years, but you've taken on some critical cases that have implication on our legal system and our courts and our laws. And I'd love to just hear from you, your perspective and your insight on the impact of these cases on our legal system and what precedent all of this sets in our system. And so please share with us some of your thoughts.
Yeah, Steve, it's really good to hear from you shedding light on the history of this country, because free speech has always been something that has been under attack in one way or another. And when it comes to Palestinian free speech, there's a history of Palestinian Americans and Palestinians in this country being attacked and facing immigration consequences for speaking about Palestinian human rights. I encourage all the viewers to look up the LA8 case. It was a 2-decade saga where Palestinians were put into deportation proceedings for the simple act of distributing pro-Palestinian literature. So, the past is prologue. Where we are today is always informed by where we have been in the past. So the two cannot be divorced, which is why I'm grateful to hear Steve talk about this country's history. And that brings me to this present moment where, I work on a lot of cases that are sort of the legacy of the post 9/11 era. One of my clients, she's suffering the consequences of having been locked up post 9/11. So I find myself sort of connecting the dots a lot in my practice. And one thing that always strikes me is that post 9/11, there was this necessary calculation we did as a country where we, as a public, largely acquiesced that we were going to be less free because we wanted to be more secure, or at least that was the way it was portrayed to us. So we give up some of our civil liberties so that we could be more secure. In wartime, that happens. Right now, we are not in wartime, right? And yet we are seeing American students on American soil being abducted in broad daylight by masked men. And like you said, Haris, this should terrify us all, right? This should not happen in a democracy. Students should not be getting disappeared and then renditioned 1,400 miles to different detention centers around the country in a democracy. But that's what we're seeing. We're seeing the arrest, the detention, and possible deportation of green card holders and student visa holders. And look, this was promised to us by Trump during when he was on the campaign trail, right? Jenna, you talked about the executive orders, and one of the things I'm working on right now is representing Mamadou Tal and 2 citizen plaintiffs in a court of law, and we're targeting the 2 executive orders that the Trump administration put into effect in January. And one of the things the executive order says, the fact sheet that accompanies it, is a promise that President Trump made on the campaign trail that he would deport Hamas sympathizers and revoke student visas. And he said specifically, to all the resident aliens who join in the pro-jihadist protests, we put you on notice. Come 2025, we will find you and we will deport you. I will also quickly cancel the student visas of all Hamas sympathizers on college campuses, which have been infested with radicalism like never before. So the government tells on itself, right? What we're seeing now, what they're trying to do in courts, for instance, in the Mamadou hearing that we just had on last Tuesday, they're trying to say that these executive orders are meant to protect our national security. This is a foreign policy determination made by the Secretary of State, who has broad powers. The president has broad powers to enforce immigration laws in a way that protects our national security. And all of that is they're contradicting statements that they've made themselves in public, where they have made it very clear that what they're going after is pro-Palestinian speech, which is completely illegal under the First Amendment. So what are we seeing as a result of this? We're seeing the arrest the detention and possible deportation of non-citizens. And this has included green card holders. This has included people on valid F1, J1, H1B visas. And I want to emphasize here that this is not scattershot targeting of people, sort of throughout the country. These are Muslim students who are coming home or going to iftars. Right? These are students who are being picked up without arrest warrants. These are students who do not have criminal histories. At most, for instance, my client Mamadou Tall had some disciplinary actions that were taken by Cornell University as a result of his protest, and he was cleared. And his suspension was revoked, and he was allowed to return to campus in a few weeks. And yet here we are, where these students are being hunted like animals. And what do we anticipate that we'll see more of? Not just more, we'll definitely see more arbitrary visa denials and visa revocations and arbitrary detentions, but we'll see an impact, a chill on free speech, on citizens as well. So in the case that we brought on behalf of Mamadou, we also have 2 citizen plaintiffs. And what we're arguing there is that these executive orders are chilling the free speech rights of citizens on campuses as well. And Harris, you talked about fielding calls from people around the country, including citizens. I'm having the same experience. Citizens are understandably scared of voicing their views on campuses, on social media, because they don't want to be labeled as pro-Hamas. They don't want to be labeled as pro-jihadis. These are terrifying allegations that can have lifelong consequences, which those of us who have worked in the space post 9/11 know what that can look like. So I hope that sort of answers the question of what this present moment is and what the litigation is aimed at.
Right. Thank you so much. That's really helpful, Maria. And no, you're 100% right. The chilling effect is real. I'm like I mentioned in my opening, as I'm traveling the country and speaking to American Muslim communities, I'm even having citizens who are saying, you know what, I'm not going to say anything on social media, which is just so problematic, because it is our fundamental right as Americans to be able to express ourselves, even if that expression is unpopular at times. So thank you for those important reflections. Lauren, I want to move to you before we get into our moderated discussion. Kenneth Stern, who was the author of the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, Steve, that you mentioned, wrote an article in The Guardian, and we've been talking to Kenneth directly about his definition. And he said, he wrote the definition, and he said his definition is being politicized and being used by the right wing in ways that he never intended and never meant. We know that anti-Semitism is a real issue. We know that. We know that Islamophobia is a real issue. These are ideologies of hate that actually probably emanate from the same sources against both American Muslims and American Jews. And anti-Semitism is on the rise, and so is Islamophobia. But then there's a feeling that anti-Semitism is being used as a tool by certain entities, by certain agencies, by certain groups to really limit the free speech of certain Americans. Can you shed light on this and how we should reflect on this and react on this?
Yes, definitely. That was a good encapsulation. And just to reground in, what the role If Not Now plays. So we're a movement of American Jews organizing our community to end the U.S. support for Israel's system of apartheid and demand equality, justice, and a thriving future for all Palestinians and Israelis. And what we're seeing in terms of the extreme and hateful weaponization of anti-Semitism, one is cruel and horrific and terrifying for all the reasons that we've already named here. And it does absolutely nothing to make Jews safer at all in the United States or anywhere in the world, including notably in Israel, Israel-Palestine. So that's because this is all part of the right-wing attempt to pursue authoritarianism, white supremacy, and have, the Christian Zionists, which I can talk about more, but the kind of ideology of wiping out Palestinians and non-Christians from the region of Israel, Palestine, to enact their white supremacist Christian nationalist viewpoint. And so the correlation between how we're seeing them weaponize anti-Semitism is also directly linked to actual rise of anti-Semitism, because it's fomenting the same system that anti-Semitism originates from, which is a strategy of division, of in encouraging fear, of creating mistrust and confusion between all of the people that need to be aligned in order to fight against the systems of white supremacy. And so we're seeing Trump nominate and likely the Senate confirm Mike Huckabee, a Christian Zionist who has zero negative ounces of care about Jewish safety. Him and his friends definitely want all Jews to find themselves in Israel in the rapture, so the Christians can have their land of Palestine and freedom. We're seeing Musk and many others, Steve Bannon, wave Nazi salutes. So there is absolutely no world in which any of this weaponization, this claim to fight anti-Semitism, makes any Jew here or anywhere safer. And it does, again, the exact opposite, only foments all of the systems of authoritarianism and white supremacy that make Jews and everyone else less safe. So I think one thing that we are taking really, really seriously is organizing our community and kind of contextualizing all of this, because it is meant to be confusing. It is meant to create division, to say, this is Project Esther. It's written by the Heritage Foundation. There was not one Jew consulted or named in that plan. It stems from the same operation that created Project 2025, that created this lineage of white supremacy, from the Ku Klux Klan to the South African apartheid regime. And it's all part of an effort to take down the most vulnerable, and by creating the laws that are first going after the Palestine rights movement. Once you create a law, it's a law that can be applied to anyone. So the goal is not just to rid the United States of the Palestine rights movement. It is to rid the United States of all political opposition to the right wing, and to completely dismantle democracy and civil liberties, all for the goal of right-wing billionaires having completely unfettered, unlimited wealth at the expense of all of us. And so it is extremely angering and just, on a daily basis, hourly basis,
completely understand.
being
It really is.
okay, my entire existence is to denounce this thing.
No,
And
it's a lot for a lot of us to deal with, and I think that's partly why we're having this conversation now. I'm going to switch over to the moderated portion of this conversation, and ask you, Jenna, first the question about we're stating the problems, and we know the reality, we know the problems, there's challenges, but the ACLU has always been part of the solution. Like, their history has been part of the solution. And I just would love to hear from you. As people are listening, they're looking for some hope. They're looking for things to do. Everybody keeps asking me, what can we do? How can we actually get involved? How can we be responsive? Can you talk to us a little bit about some ways people can potentially be involved, and what the ACLU is doing to push back on some of this, has historically done, is doing now, and what can we do as communities to really, make sure that we're supporting the work of the ACLU in its ability to defend our First Amendment?
Somewhat ironically, one of the best things that people can do is to continue to use their voice and continue to speak out. I think what this administration wants is they want to chill people. They want, to scare people into submission and scare people into not speaking about protected political speech. And we all need to be vocal and say that that is wrong. We have a First Amendment. We need to protect it. The ACLU and other organizations have actions and letters seeking to free detainees. We can and should be telling our members of Congress that they need to be doing more to protect people that are exercising their free speech rights. We need to build champions in Congress. Those people are, well positioned to push back against the administration. We need to be pushing universities as well and make sure that they know that they are not under these obligations they're not under obligations to essentially become an arm of ICE. They are under an obligation to educate their students. They should be protecting the free speech rights of their students, and they shouldn't become sort of this other arm helping to deport students. They should be, continuing to promote protests and events that espouse different viewpoints. The ACLU, obviously, our most prominent work is legal. We're involved in a number of lawsuits right now, including Khalil's lawsuit. I anticipate that as other people are arrested and detained, we'll probably do more lawsuits. This isn't, I'm not on our litigation team, I'm on our policy team, so I can only say so much. Also, there's active litigation, so I can only say so much. But I think that's huge. We are having success in the courts. Yeah. And at some point, quite honestly, people are surprised by this. The ACLU, I believe, has 6 First Amendment litigators and me on the policy team at our national organization. So, having people like Maria out there and others who can defend people that are wronged, we need other groups that are willing and able to do that as well, because as much as I would love for the ACLU to do all of it, we can't. So I think, those groups that are able to, I would encourage you to, we need to make sure that we're loud, that the government knows that this isn't okay. We have free speech rights. We are going to exercise them. I believe we are going to win in court because these cases are just so very clear cut. And we need to also focus on the fact that for many of these people, they haven't actually been accused of more than speech. Yeah. Right? That's a point I think that needs to be driven home. They haven't been accused of violence or breaking any laws. They have literally, the actual accusations from the government are that these people spoke. Yeah. So, I know that's not as much as people want to do. I think people want to do more, but I ultimately think not letting this fall by the wayside, not falling victim to the fact that there's so much hopelessness in the world, and to continue to speak out and make sure that our policy leaders know that this is wrong, that litigators are willing to step up. I think that's the most important thing that can be done. I wish there was even more. I think those are the most impactful things, though, honestly.
I really think you're 100% right on this, because to be very honest with you, what they're trying to achieve is a silencing that then would allow them to do more, right? If there's no pushback, if there's no speaking out. And so what's happening is they're bringing such egregious cases to scare people and to put fear into the hearts of people, so people kind of calm down, right? And stop pushing back and stop speaking out. And that's a problem, because if people push back, Senator Warnock said something that was really absolutely amazing the other day on the Hill when we were with him. He said the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, when he got the Civil Rights Act passed, he was at the White House with President Johnson. And he told President Johnson, after the signing of the Civil Rights Act, as they were leaving the White House, he told the president, he said, "Mr. President, now we need a voting rights act." And the president told Martin Luther King, he said, I just can't do that. There's no way I can push a Voting Rights Act through this Congress. I just got the Civil Rights Act passed. I can't do this. This is just no way I can get this done. I don't have the ability. I don't have the power to do this. So the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and his team left the White House, and they gathered outside the White House. And so one of the pastors asked Martin Luther King, what do we do now? He said he's not going to pass. He doesn't have the power to pass a Voting Rights Act. And MLK said something that was absolutely brilliant. He said, he goes, my brothers, we have to give the president the power now. I mean, this is the president, the most powerful man on earth, and here's a pastor saying, now we have to give the president the power, which means we have to now make sure that we give the people in power in Congress who are willing to stand up against this, the power to actually push back. And if we are silenced as a nation, if we're silenced as Americans, if we're silenced as minorities, then we won't be able to give power to those people. And that's what we have to do. This is our moment now, is to give them the power. Steve, I wanted to move to you. What's happening on campuses with Mahmoud, with the case yesterday at Tufts, with the case at Georgetown, with Mahmoud's case? If this actually happens and some of these cases are successful, what are the implications of this for our legal system, for our First Amendment? Can you talk a little bit about the broader implications, please?
Thank you. I think we should be very realistic. Unfortunately, there are laws on the books that the government is invoking. I mentioned the Alien Enemies Act. Just yesterday, a court of appeals, 2-1, voted that the enforcement of that act today is probably unconstitutional. We are not at a state of war. We have not suffered an invasion of this country, despite the rhetoric around immigration. So those judges made that very clear. The second law that's being used is a 1952 law, which I think Maria alluded to, that is being used against Khalil and the others who are being taken off the streets, removed on their way to religious meetings. The 1952 law purports on its face to give the Secretary of State the unilateral power to detain and deport anyone who is raising potentially serious adverse foreign policy consequences for the United States. Now, these laws should not be on the books. They should have been reformed and repealed years ago. Fortunately, the only time the 52 statute's been tested was in 1996, and a very smart judge issued an opinion striking down that law. And I won't quote fully from her opinion. That judge was Marianne Trump Barry, Donald Trump's sister, issued the strongest opinion condemning this 1952 law. I think Donald Trump said he respected his sister, and he should have respected her decisions as well. We need to recognize the spread of this. It is going, as all of our panelists have indicated, far beyond Mahmoud Khalil to Ramyese Ostuk at Tufts. Fortunately, she has been supported by the Massachusetts Attorney General, Andrea J. Joy Campbell, who called it intimidation and is speaking out against it. I think we do face cases like the humanitarian law case that claim material support for terrorism can be punished, but every case we're talking about today is pure speech. It is pure speech that needs to be protected, even in the hands of people who are not citizens. Our Constitution speaks of people and persons when it comes to the Bill of Rights and the relevant provisions. And it's important to recognize that Benjamin Franklin said, those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. We have to remember those principles today, and that's why it's so important that we organize. The ACLU also has people power. It has a robust wing of activism. Litigation is necessary but not sufficient. We have brilliant lawyers at the Center for Constitutional Rights, Palestinian Legal, the ACLU, that are doing extraordinary work with 127 lawsuits and almost 30 injunctions. But we the people, that's how our Constitution begins. We the people have to support that litigation in the streets, joining Indivisible and other community groups around this country. We've got to rise up in public protest to what this government is doing.
Thank you so much, Steve. Maria, heading over to you now. Can you also talk a little bit more about the implication of these cases and where you see this heading?
Yeah, so Trump has a flood the zone strategy that's designed to overwhelm us. It's designed to paralyze us with sort of this fear and hopelessness. And one good thing to have come out of this moment since Mahmoud Khalil was abducted and the subsequent detaining and threats of detention for students is that we have realized the importance of the First Amendment and that we cannot take our fundamental rights for granted. We have to fight for them. It's a continuous fight. And it's clear from this administration's stance, as I said before, that they're interested in censoring everyone. It's not just limited to non-citizens, right? So we have to be relentless. The students who are non-citizens put themselves out for Palestine and for the truth, and they sit on the right side of history. Now it's our turn, those of us who are citizens and who have that sort of safety net in terms of our immigration status, to stand up for these students. For instance, like my team, we work pro bono. One of the ways that people can support is by donating to keep us going, because these are going to be long battles. Some of these battles will go to the highest courts of the land, is what I foresee, because it's not as simple as, filing a habeas to sort of bring somebody out of the detention that they've been put into. There's a lot of other moving pieces that we're going to have to contest and fight for each and every student. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is to use the safety net of your immigration status. So if you are a citizen, to speak up and stand on the right side of history, just as the students did, who are now being turned into examples, right? And then the other thing is we need to hold our schools accountable, right? The government is using schools and third parties to sort of launder the government's efforts to infringe on our First Amendment rights. So they're saying to institutions like Columbia and Harvard and Cornell that we're going to take away your licensing, your funding. We're going to hyper-regulate you in a way as to coerce you into doing our dirty work and infringe on your students' and faculty's free speech and expression rights. And the net result is that we're seeing this targeting. We have to push back against that, right? Schools should not be part of the problem. They need to be part of the solution, right? If schools do not push back now, we're going to set a legal precedent where universities are working with law enforcement and they're essentially handing their students over. And unfortunately, we have seen this happen. Right? Universities have been sharing information with law enforcement. They've handed over student records, they've handed over surveillance footage, protest participation details to law enforcement, sometimes without having a legal obligation to even do that. And we can't have a situation where campuses are turned into surveillance zones, right? Instead of schools treating student protests as protected speech, which is what they are, instead of students who are non-citizens having the right to speak freely, which the Constitution protects them, right? You don't have to be a citizen to have the constitutional right to speak freely. We have schools that are invoking these very vague policies, such as disruptive conduct or security concerns, to sort of justify not just their own disciplinary actions, but the subsequent arrests that we've seen and suspensions. And all this has contributed to the chilling effect on campuses. So that has to stop. And that's something that we can all work on our local levels, right?
Thank Much, Maria. So we've got some questions. Lauren, I want to let you make some remarks. I know you wanted to make a comment. And then we've got some questions from the audience that I want to get to you guys as well, because we're getting closer to time. So please, Lauren, go ahead, and then we'll start with the questions for the audience.
Great. Yeah, I just wanted to chime in when Stephen was speaking about the Carr and Walter Act, the 1952 bill that's being invoked, or yeah, the law in the books there. That it was also, I think this is really important in our messaging and legal pursuits and whatnot, our organizing strategy, that law was also used against Holocaust survivors seeking safety in the United States after World War II. And that's something that's not kind of permeated the mainstream understanding of that rule. But yeah, just as they're saying, like, this is to protect against anti-Semitism, it's just an extremely clear microcosm of how, that hypocrisy, how deep the hypocrisy is.
That's such an important point, Lauren, because we always say, it will never impact just one group. When there's a problematic policy or law, it starts with one group, but then it continues. But the irony of this specifically is really intense. So thank you for bringing that up. Maria, a question for you. Someone is asking what rights a foreign student on an F1 visa may have to assert in defense against government actions, such as what this administration is undertaking, especially a student on an F1 visa. What rights do they actually have, or protections or defense? You're on mute.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
So students have First Amendment protections regardless of their immigration status. Unfortunately, though, if your visa is revoked as sort of a punitive retaliatory measure, which is what we've seen in a lot of these cases, including my client Mamadou's case, where they just revoked his visa, there is not much that we can do to contest that, because the government has broad discretion in both the issuance and the revoking of visas. It cannot do that in a discriminatory and retaliatory manner, but you consult with a lawyer if you are being targeted in this way, or if your visa you believe is under threat or has been revoked. Please certainly get in touch with an attorney. There's a group of us attorneys who are mobilizing to provide support to students in this moment. But in general, it's important that everybody know that First Amendment protections, your constitutional protections, are intact even if you are not a citizen of this country.
Thank you, Maria. If you can link the link for your group and a donate button as well, so that we can put it out there, so people can support your work. Please do that, and we'll make sure we get that out. Stephen, a question for you from one of our attendees. She asked, "Can you please discuss the implications of a situation where the president flaunts the order of the court? We've already seen a bit of that with Judge Bosberg's ruling on turning around the plane to El Salvador, and the administration not abiding by that. Will that result in chilling even the judges from issuing decisions that they think there's a chance that the administration won't implement for fear of undermining the authority of the judicial branch?" A really important question.
So far, judges are standing up to Trump. They are issuing orders. They are following up with the Department of Justice. There are remedies. While the Supreme Court shamefully gave Donald Trump criminal immunity, his underlings can face criminal contempt of court. Judges can put them in jail. There is the power of civil contempt. Judges can appoint private attorneys outside of the Department of Justice to enforce their orders. And it depends on the strength of the judges. We have 6 Supreme Court justices who are conservatives. They have made some initial rulings that ran against Trump, and I'm hopeful they will do more. This is why the protests and the uprising in America must be even stronger. There's a major national rally planned for April 5th in places across the country. We need to make it so harmful for Donald Trump and his underlings to defy these courts that they will not do so. It's a huge task, and we all have to be part of it.
Thank you so much. That's really helpful, Stephen. The other question in terms of this, and maybe Jenna, if you're able to take this, um, what do you think in terms of asking about a constitutional crisis that's arising from the executive branch to comply with the court's order? We hear a lot about a constitutional crisis, constitutional crisis. Is that an actual thing? Is that real? Is that something that is that can potentially be triggered? What does that mean? We're getting that question.
Um, I'm gonna not answer that one
Okay.
right
Does,
now.
does any of the other lawyers want to take it on? Maria or Stephen? Steve, please.
Yeah, I'll just quickly chime in here and say the courts are really what's holding the line right now. These are really brave judges. These are really brave attorneys who have been turning to the courts. What we say when we mean a constitutional crisis is that, we have a separation of powers in this country, the executive branch, the legislative branch, and then the judicial branch. And if you have one branch that is now sort of circumventing the other branch and disregarding the rulings of that branch, like we saw in the case where you had a Judge Boasberg say, stop the deportation flights, bring them back. And you still had the flights land in El Salvador, and the El Salvadoran leadership go, oops, on Twitter. That to me is an indication that our constitution is now sort of in flux, right? Because you have the executive branch flagrantly disregarding what the judicial branch is saying. And that should concern, again, every American, right? This is not limited to students. This is not limited to immigrants. This is not limited to undocumented people. This is democracy on the line.
Thank you for that. We actually have a question from a student that says, my university is saying that they have to hand over student information if they have a subpoena. Can they refuse in this instance to hand over, in theory, can they refuse to hand over student information? Steve?
It is very dangerous to do an outright refusal of a lawful subpoena endorsed or issued by a judge. I would invoke the check with a lawyer. I know you might be faced at your front door with such an order. You should try to immediately consult with counsel. None of us on this panel want to encourage lawlessness, other than in a civil disobedience setting, which is a separate category. And I wonder if Maria can add to the notion of getting a subpoena or a summons.
No, I echo everything you say. Compliance is critical at this time with the law. That is what we're here for, to say that we must uphold the law and follow judicial court orders. That's what we're asking the Trump administration to do in our case, and that's what we require schools to do if there's a lawful order.
And that doesn't mean you shouldn't videotape what is happening, get the names of the officers, immediately seek counsel to file an effort to quash that subpoena and get back any materials that were illegally taken.
Great. Thank you so much. And a question to, I think you might be answering it already, Lauren, was about some of these third-party groups like BITAR that are giving information of students to the Department of Homeland Security and other government agencies. What are your thoughts in terms of pushing back on some of this? Because they seem to be just going after everyone, and it looks like this Turkish national who was picked up at Tufts, she just wrote an op-ed, but she was put on the Canary Mission list, and that's the only place she ended up on and eventually picked up. So do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, I did just put some thoughts in the chat, but just to verbalize as well, absolutely need to condemn in cases where it is corroborated that Jewish groups like the extremist far-right Beitar and or other individuals or groups are sharing names or victimizing, attacking activists or anyone who they want to, like, absolutely push back against that, just like we would against any other group that was villainizing and harming students in this way. And at the same time, a lot of these allegations have not been fully corroborated, that it is Jews and Jewish groups sharing the lists and being informants right now. And it actually really supports the right-wing strategy of anti-Semitism to distract from the fact that the universities are sharing the lists, that ICE and DHS are like, just like finding all information and instead of targeting those people with that responsibility, it's really convenient to say like Jews are sharing the list. So yes, and like we should condemn anyone doing this, and we should be really clear in pressuring the power holders who are breaching information and complying with the Trump regime.
Thank you so much. I'm going to take one final question, and then we're going to end by a special poem by Steve that he'll end us with. But the last question, which is something that I got even last night, to be honest with you, the question was, what's your advice for those who are green card holders or just legal residents but not citizens? Is there any advice, general advice, not specific counsel, that you can give on participating in protests and being part of sit-ins and being part of demonstrations? There's a big demonstration happening in DC on April 5th, and a lot of green card holders or visa holders might participate. Do you all have any general advice for those folks? I know I gave very specific advice to the people who asked me, but do you all have general advice?
So I'll just quickly chime in here and quote Gadir Abbas, who is one of my mentors and senior litigation counsel at CARE National. And he had a really good approach to this. He said, this is the moment for citizens to stand up. Our undocumented brothers and sisters, our green card holder brothers and sisters, their safety and their security is on the line. And unfortunately, that's the reality of the times. And I don't like fear mongering. I want to leave as much as possible on a message of hope, saying that, we're here, we're holding the line, we're turning to the courts, we're doing whatever we can in our to defend the rights of these students who have been targeted and will be targeted. But at the same time, if it's pro-Palestinian human rights that you've been standing up for, Palestine will do better with you here in this country, continuing to fight that fight, right? We're only 90 days into this administration. It's going to be a long 4 years. I'm not telling anybody to shut up and sit down, because that's not at all my style. In terms of the work I do, I stand up for the most oppressed. But at the same time, be strategic in your calculation. If there is a personal security threat to you, this is not the moment, right? And for us citizens, that means that there's more work for us to do in this moment.
Great. Anybody else on that, or is that Well, okay. So what we'll do is, first of all, thank you all. Thank you to the panel for joining. It was an amazing conversation, so fruitful. I'm more hopeful after this conversation, and we'll continue these at MPAC. We're going to continue these conversations. We're going to make sure that we have more of these. We're going to expand our coalitions, and so we're really looking forward to being in community with all of you. And we're going to end with Steve giving us a poem. And really hopefully bringing us some hope and shedding some wisdom for us. So, Steve, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you so much. Some of you are aware of the German theologian and Lutheran pastor Martin Niemöller. Niemöller originally supported the Nazi regime, but he soon saw what it was doing. He was sent to a Nazi concentration camp from which he survived. And after the war, he wrote a poem, First They Came. And shortly after 9/11, I wrote an adaptation of this poem for the Muslim Public Affairs Journal. And recently, I've written a new adaptation. First They Came for Mahmoud Khalil, a Palestinian activist for leading protests at Columbia University, and I didn't speak out because I was not a Palestinian. Then they came for immigrants, deporting them without trials under the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, and I didn't speak out because I was not an immigrant. Then they came for any pro-Palestinian protester who held a student visa, and I didn't speak out because I am an American citizen and don't rely on a student visa. Then they came for lawyers representing clients the government wants to punish, and I didn't speak out because I don't have clients the government wants to punish. Then they came for judges who issued rulings against the government, and I didn't speak out because I was not a judge. Then they came for social justice organizations accused of supporting America's enemies, and I didn't speak out because I no longer belong to any social justice organizations. Then they came for anyone using forbidden words like diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. And I didn't speak out because I no longer use any forbidden words. Then they came for U.S. citizens, protesting government abuse, prosecuting them under the Espionage Act of 1917, and I didn't speak out because I no longer protest government abuse. Then they came for me, and by then there was no one left to speak out for me.
Thank you so much, Steve. That was beautiful, and I think that should motivate us to work and to activate, and that's what we will do. So again, thank you so much to our panelists for this wonderful conversation. Thank you to our attendees for being part of the conversation, and we look forward to continuing these panels. So please be on the lookout for the next one. And again, on behalf of the Muslim Public Affairs Council, I want to thank you all, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve, can you send that to me?
Thank you, Lauren. It is posted at MPAC, and I'll send it to you.
Okay, great. I'll find it on MPAC's sites then. That's great.
Yes. No, and I want to stay in close touch with you.
Yeah, I would love that. I'll send contact over email. It's great.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank
Have a
you.
good rest of your day.
Be well. Be safe
too.
yourself.
Thank you. You too.